All right, so here's our second part of the angiosperm video. We left off last time just starting to talk about the angiosperm life cycle, key factors that trigger germination of that angiosperm seed is soil temperature and change that. No, actually, let's go like this: soil temperature and water. For corn, it's actually 50 degrees soil temperature. Your air could be 25, but if your soil's 50, then your seed's going to germinate. And vice versa. If your air is 70, but your soil's in the 40s, seed won't germinate. So it's all about soil temperature. All right, so seeds get germinated, apical growth is happening, energy is getting pushed into developing these leaves. The leaves then start photosynthesizing, and over the course of the next couple weeks, your plant starts to grow. It takes about 9 weeks for that plant to get to its full height, and then it says, okay, time for reproduction. Now, when it goes into sexual reproduction happens with those structures we talked about in the previous lecture. So the anthers are going to be the structures that will produce the pollen or the sperm. Okay, so anthers, boy parts, pollen production, sperm production. Okay, so that's what we want to remember there. So the structure here, let me get the draw. This, that is the anther, or we often call it the tassel. So the tassel is the male reproductive structure, male sexual reproductive structure in the corn plant. The style is then going to be the structure that will catch the pollen. So we talked about the style. Let me jump back up here just briefly. If you remember, here's the style. That's that tube. Well, technically the stigma, and then the style is that tube. So in the corn, what we would consider the style would be the silk. This is what's going to catch the pollen grains. So in the case of corn, the pollen is windblown, and it comes down and gets caught on the silk. The silk then transfers that pollen, allows that pollen to move down to the ovary. The ovary is going to be the structure that will house the eggs. Okay, and then within the ovary we have the ovule. That will be the actual egg structure there. So what we're going to see all about certain environmental conditions happen to get that to occur. The ovule is going to be what will develop into the actual seed of the corn. When we look at the ovule, okay, so this will become the new seed. The ovary in certain flowering plants is what would actually become the fruit that we eat. So when you're eating an apple, you don't eat the seed, you eat the ovary or the fruit part of it. So the ovary develops into that structure. So, okay, so now this is the general life cycle. I said all the flowering plants are going to follow a very similar pattern using the same basic structures. I just wanted to put it into application when we live in Illinois and we have so much corn, soybeans follow a similar pattern as well, all happening around us. And some of you may have a background in agriculture, friends or family, or interest in moving into that field. The more you can understand this, the more you're going to know how to grow corn. So you hear about people detasseling. Doesn't happen as much anymore, but detasseling is literally, I want to cut that off so I don't pollinate my corn plant. So can you still get a seed? Sure. You still can get the fruit of the corn, which are the seeds, but there's no embryo inside of it. There's no actual new zygote that would develop into the embryo that would become the new corn plant. Okay, so that's whole different conversation. If you guys are interested in that, I'd encourage you look at the agricultural program at Lincoln Land, and you will learn a massive amount about how this works. So, all right, but what is different in the angiosperms than back in the gymnos is this double fertilization I mentioned before. So the pollen lands up on top of the style there. The stigma is a sticky part that catches it, and then it moves down the style. It will form a pollen tube similar to the gymnosperm, but then what will happen is double fertilization will actually discharge two sperm into each ovule. So gymnosperms, it was one sperm swims its way down. Angiosperms, they do a double duty. So you get two of these little guys going. There's one. And there's a second sperm that are coming down to that particular ovule. And then you'll have the same thing over here. Two of them to this one, two of them to that one, two of them to that one, that one, so on and so on. So what's crazy, and I encourage you guys this summer to look at it, grab an ear of corn, and every one of these little tassels comes off of a kernel. Every single tassel is that tube, literally that tube that will connect or allow the pollen, the sperm, to swim down to the ovule. So you look at that little kernel or ear of corn, and this is a very underdeveloped one, but every seed here, and there's hundreds of seeds here, every seed is the result of two sperm getting to the ovule. Sometimes you'll grab an ear of corn and you'll peel the husk back, and you'll see holes in there where no seeds developed. Well, that means pollen didn't get down to the ovule, and it didn't fertilize, or it didn't do double fertilization. Okay, so now what gets really cool with this is two sperms swim down, one sperm hits and becomes a zygote. So the zygote develops into the embryo. The second sperm develops into this thing known as endosperm. All right, so sperm one, let's give him a little tail. There's his little, let's give him a little helmet. So he's number one, becomes a zygote that then develops into the embryo. That's what we call the seed. Not truly the full seed, but that is the thing that will become your new corn plant. The second sperm, there he is, number two, goes and fertilizes and becomes, doesn't fertilize and blend genetics with the egg, but actually develops into what's known as the endosperm. That is all the nutrition that is surrounding the embryo that the embryo will use during germination. That's why we eat corn, is because of the energy stored here in the endosperm. This is the nutritional value of corn when we eat it. That stuff right there. Embryo, yeah, you're eating a baby plant. That's the reality of it. That embryo is what would turn into the new plant. And then the seed coat, that just helps protect the embryo. Tries to keep the embryo safe. So when you compare seed plants against plants that produce spores, the game has changed. Whole different perspective here, because not only are you protecting your embryo better, you're also giving it a food supply, and it's all wrapped up and housed in this nice little package we call the fruit of the plant. Yes, the corn kernel, we could officially call it the fruit. It's hard, it's solid, it's durable, but that technically is still the fruit of the plant. Okay, so big things I want you guys to remember. Let me drop an extra slide in here. When we talk about why seed plants are so good, let's say they're so adaptable, not good, that doesn't sound very scientific. Why seed plants are so adaptable, they can maintain dormancy, they have a maximum level of protection for the embryo, they have stored food for the embryo, and they also are adapted for dispersal. All right, so yeah, lots of things, lots of animals like to eat fruit. That's the point of the fruit, is to attract the predator, to get the predator to eat it, and then the predator walks away, flies away, and poops out the seeds away from the parent plant. You don't find a lot of predators doing that with spores. They don't eat the fern leaves and go, let me walk a couple miles and drop fern spores. It just doesn't work that way. Again, this is why these guys are so darn adaptable and dominant on Earth today. So all sorts of things they've evolved, strategies that they've evolved to make them so successful. So one last thing to mention, here's some crazy numbers. One corn seed equals corn plant equals 2 to 5 million pollen grains. And that can equal, on an ear of corn, anywhere from 600 to about 1,000 seeds or kids. So think about biotic potential, reproductive potential here. It is huge. One seed can give you up to 1,000 babies. If 1% of that survives, that's 100 new corn plants. One corn seed produces 100 new surviving corn plants. That's phenomenal. Massive, massive biotic potential. So, all right. So, general life cycle, here it is. Most of the life cycle is spent in the diploid portion, 2N, full genetic complement. The only time we're talking about haploid is when pollen is there and you got that pollination process happening, the egg is produced. Very, very small window of the flowering plant's life cycle. Now, once fruit is produced, the fruit is what we often focus on with the flowering plants. We go, ooh, look at this. The fruit is going to come from the ovary. The ovule is what develops into the seed, singular. The ovary is what will develop into the fruit we eat. So peaches, apples, bananas, pears, etc. Any of the fruit we eat, the fleshy part, the ground tissue and dermal, that is the ovary. We tend not to eat the pit of the peach or the seed, the core of the apple. That's where the ovule is at. Right? So those are fruits that are meant or evolved for dispersal through animals. Other fruit can be dispersed by wind, by all sorts of different ways. The point of the fruit is to aid in the dispersal of the seed. How can I get my seed away from me? So when we look at those maple seeds over on the side there, we call them little helicopters. These guys here, they fall off and they go, and they just kind of spin like a helicopter. Or if you got cockleburs and these barbs attaching to you when you go through the woods, or your dog does, that's all evolved to be able to disperse the seeds away from the parent plant. So, all right. So lecture 3, we'll keep talking about angiosperms.